Hi, good evening, everyone. So today we have with us Ishaan Sengupta. He was the topper of last year's ISI exam and also IIT JAM Economics 2023. He secured All India Rank 1 in both the exams. So welcome to the show, Ishaan. Currently,
Hi.
he is pursuing masters from ISI. So, Ishan, today we would like to go ahead and understand what your strategy was in preparing for ISI exam. And also, if you could highlight, the first thing as to why you chose ISI over IIT, it would be a great help to students.
So for me, I want to do a PhD, right? And I've been pretty clear about that for some time now. So, and then for that, I think ISI Delhi is the best place in the country. That's why, so my aim was always ISI. IIT and say CUET and other exams were like a backup or a mock test for ISI. So, I was always going to choose ISI, and I think if anybody wants to do a PhD, like that choice is very clear. They should come to ISI as well.
Okay. So why ISI Delhi over ISI Kolkata?
Again, for the same reason. In fact, yeah, I think this is quite important to address. I would say that make up your mind before you fill up the form. I don't know if the date is, if we are past the date or not, but if you want to do a PhD, ISI Delhi is significantly better than ISI Calcutta for anything related to research. Although ISI Calcutta is also decent, but if you're getting into both, it's always better to come to Delhi. And for placements, ISI Calcutta, I think, has a slight edge, corporate placements. So depending on your aim, I think you should be very clear about which of these places. So I chose Delhi for the same reason again. I wanted to do PhD. So yeah.
Okay. Just an off question. So when you say PhD, is PhD supposedly to be done from India? Should one be doing PhD from India, or should one be focusing on other universities?
If you look at it purely from an academic perspective, it's obviously better to do it abroad. Uh, and simply because the infrastructure or the funding or just the professors available in general are better at the places you can get into after you have studied from an ISI or a DSC. But I think there are a lot of factors a person takes into consideration. Many people want to continue staying here. Or if you work in a particular field which a particular professor in India is very good at, then it's also fine to, I think, stay here.
Hmm.
But in general, going outside seems to be a
Better choice. Got it. Okay, Shan. So how should one be preparing for ISI PEA first, especially now that they have already given their IIT exam and they know pretty much some background about economics, micro, macro. They have done some level of, of mock papers and MCQs. How should they be approaching the last 1.5, 2 months?
So I think the first thing is you can't prepare separately for PE and PB, especially because it's like if you're prepared for PEB, I think you're prepared for PEA, but not necessarily the other way around. So, but first, I think let's talk about the syllabus itself. One thing I personally noticed is that, if you look at the range of questions ISI now asks in the last 3-4 years, I think probably post-pandemic, it's much wider. So I think previously there was this notion that you could skip a lot of topics and still go on and get into ISI. I think that's no longer true. So in these 1.5 months that are left, I think if there are certain topics which you're really not very confident in, I would say you should assess what you're good at, what you're not good at, and try and shore up your weaknesses. So, if your macro is not very good or your growth models in macro are not very good, or your 11-12 maths is not very good, you should probably spend a little bit of time, maybe 3-4 days on a topic at max, to try and shore that topic up. So I think that's the first thing. You cannot, I think, at this point in time, leave aside any topic and go on confidently for the exam, because you're going to be tested on almost everything. If you look at the papers, they've become far more, broad-based than they used to be. Last year, for instance, there was this question on ASAD in the PEB paper, which is something I think very often people used to skip. And I remember a lot of people actually didn't do that question. I think it had some nominal wage rigidity or something. It's one of those things which traditionally we have been told doesn't come in ISI. But if you had studied that part from some textbook, it would have taken you like half an hour, 40 minutes to have studied. Then you would have gotten 30 marks for free. So I think it's important to study almost everything that is in the syllabus, at least at a reasonable level first. So that's the first thing I would request everyone to do. And if you're done with that, then I think keep revising. One thing I personally follow, not just for ISI, but for any exam is because everything is all pretty much time bound, you should try and make these things a part of your muscle memory. So if you've solved a question, you know that question, do it again, so that in the exam it takes you can do it even more quickly, and there's always going to be some pressure on during an exam. So if you've done it multiple times, it will be easier for you. Now finally, for PE and PB itself, I think so the first thing is a lot of people are afraid of the PEB, I think, more than the PA. The first thing I would like to say is that checking in PEB is actually not that strict, in the sense that you don't have to perfectly write every answer. I think this often happens because you're looking at model answers from some institute, or you've asked someone to send it. So when somebody has thought of that question for a few days or weeks and written it down or typed it out and sent it to you, I mean, when you are writing it within half an hour in an exam, you're never going to be able to match that level. So don't worry too much. Try to match that level, but don't worry if you cannot do it. That's the first thing. Now, secondly, how to prepare itself. I think what I personally did is, even when solving MCQ questions, which are usually much easier to find, I think the biggest problem with PEB is you can't find enough questions to practice that kind of thing. But even when you're solving past years of PEA type, or past DSE papers, I think try to write down those things properly as well, like you would in a subjective exam, defining things, saying what the equilibrium condition is and stuff like that, so that you get more and more practice. As for books, I didn't use any particular book for PEB. A lot of people find Nicholson Snyder very useful for PEB, or the Varian workbook. I personally didn't find them specifically useful for people, but I think those are definitely books you should take a look at as well.
Got it. So, when it comes to solving past year papers, how many past year papers do you suggest? Like, students have literally, I mean, they think that the only way to crack an ISI exam will be to go ahead and do maybe 30 years of past year paper and start from 1994 onwards. So, what would be your take on that?
So first of all, I don't think there's any magic number like 30 or 20 or 10, or a magic number of how many times you should do it. A lot of people ask me how many cycles of past years I should do. I don't think there's any such magic number. Do it as many times as possible and as many years as possible, I would say. But more importantly is, I think, instead of how many you do, is how you do it as well. I think ISI is not an exam where you're going to get questions repeated. That's what is true in my experience. I mean, it could be very related to a question that has been asked before, but I don't remember off the hand a lot of questions being repeated. So my view is that your past year should be not like a set of questions which might come again, so I have to solve it somehow and remember the solution. It's more like a way to filter out various concepts that are there in the syllabus, right? So if you have, say, last year's question on, let's say, there was this question with a uniform mass of consumers and a monopoly's optimal pricing on it, I remember,
Right.
in our year. So if you look at that question, you shouldn't be just thinking, okay, how do I solve this particular question? Let me do the solution thrice, 4 times and remember it, so that in case it comes, I'll be able to solve it. But I think each question is telling you that there's a larger class of problems that could be asked. The first concept is just this concept of a uniform mass. What does it mean? How do you deal with things like that? Secondly, with a secondly, maybe it tells you about monopoly pricing, that concept. So when you look at a question like this, don't just try to solve it. Look at what other things can be asked. And I don't think you can imagine that yourself, that you can have these questions about uniform mass, but look up at book, ask your teacher or whoever to explain to you what even a uniform mass of consumers means and things like that. So don't treat it as a question bank which might be repeated. Treat it as a collection of concepts where you can have 5, 6, 7 questions from that same concept. So if you don't understand a question, ask around, find a resource for that kind of thing and solve those things as well and take a look at those things as well. So first, there's no magic number, but second, I think this is a better way to solve past years than just looking at a question in and of itself.
Got it. So, how about maths? So students think that say Hammond or AC Chiang is not a good enough book for them to practice the mathematical concepts, especially from the point of view of ISI. And many also ask me whether they should be going ahead and doing a tomato, right, for that matter. So what was your approach when it comes to practicing maths portions of ISI?
So I never did tomato, that's one thing. But I know a lot of my batchmates who did. They found it useful, but I personally never found it to be overkill. So for me, that's a no-no. As for what I did in maths, I think it's true that, so I think the maths syllabus of ISI itself has like 2 portions. One is 11, 12 maths, which you anyway can't study from Chiang or Hammond and so on. So for that, what I did, but I suspect it's too late for that now, is I followed a lot of JEE mains material at the basic level. Like say for APGP, the first few videos in some JEE mains lecture series and practiced a bit from there. But yeah, I think if you're very weak in a particular 11, 12 concept, you can still do that. It'll maybe take you 2 days to do that for one particular concept. As for college level maths, I think my undergraduate maths instruction was pretty good. Statistics instruction as well. So I followed those notes quite a bit. We followed this book called Michael Hoy. So maybe people will find that book useful as well. But yeah, I think, so for that college level maths, real analysis, etc., these books, Hammond, Chiang, Hoy, and so on, are fine. Maybe you can look at actual math books as well for those concepts if you have a lot of time. So for linear algebra, there's this Gilbert Strang lecture series. For real analysis, there's this book by Bartle Sherbert and so on. But I think those might be overkill as well, because I don't think the maths asked in the MSQE entrance is, that advanced. I think you can solve those questions without too much knowledge of maths.
Okay. So I was asking, once a student goes ahead and clears the written exam, how should one be preparing for the interview of ISI?
So I'll first tell you what exactly happens in the interview. I think when I was here 1 year ago, I didn't know. So you're given a question which is basically like a PEB question, but shorter, significantly shorter than that. And you're given that question, you're taken to a room, you're given 10 minutes to solve that question on a piece of paper. And then you go on and give your interview where, they just ask you to solve the question. There's nothing more than that. Maybe a hi, hello, and so on, but all those are irrelevant. You solve the question on the board. And so for me, I solved it at once, and then they asked for some extension, like if this happens, how will the reaction function shift or something? It was a fairly simple question. And if you're stuck somewhere, then you're asked to explain how you got there, and they help you out a little bit. So that's what happens. So about the interview itself, the first thing is don't worry for 2 reasons. Number one, it has very low weightage. So for most of you, if you've got there, it's not going to be the deciding factor between getting in and not getting in. So don't be very stressed about it, because since you're doing it, in front of professors and everything, a lot of people get nervous. I would say relax. It's not like that. And secondly, the people taking the interview itself are always friendly and very helpful. They are not there to, reject you or intimidate you or anything. So you can relax while giving the interview. So that's the first thing. Don't worry a lot and be nervous about the interview. Now, how to prepare? I don't think there is anything extra here as such. You can take a look at some past interview questions if they are available. If you're a bit nervous talking in front of people, then maybe you should practice that with your teacher or wherever you're studying. Maybe you should practice solving questions on the board. That is another thing which a lot of people are not used to. So if you don't do a lot of problem solving on the board, maybe buy a whiteboard or whatever and solve some questions there. And for preparation, it's just like PEB. It's really nothing more than that. And as for while giving your interview, I would suggest be very clear about what you're doing. Don't just write down stuff. Tell the professors why you're defining something like that, what kind of concept you're using, why you're equating two things or whatever. Be very transparent about your process so that if there is any problem you face midway, they are able to help you and so on. But yeah, so don't worry too much. It's not very difficult. And it's probably not going to decide whether you get it.
Got it. So, Ishaan, one more thing that I wanted to understand. When it comes to the time management part of PEA and PEB, how do you manage that? How do you ensure that you solve questions in the right amount of time and you're able to attempt all questions?
So personally, I've never faced time management issues. So I just solve questions as they come, and usually I've never had a time problem. But usually I think if you do face a time problem, so first see if you have a problem at all. If you don't, then there's no point restricting yourself to anything if you don't have a time problem. But if you have a time problem, then maybe solve questions in a time bound fashion while giving mock tests or solving past years and so on. And so maybe take, I think there were 30 questions in 120. So that's 4 minutes per question. So maybe you can take 4 minutes or 5 minutes and try to solve those questions. But remember that it's not 4 minutes per question. It's 120 minutes and 30 questions because there will be easier questions and tougher questions. So maybe it's okay to take 6, 7, 8 minutes for a question, and because there'll be questions which you'll solve in 30 seconds as well. So that's for PEA, I think. But usually, I don't think a lot of people have a time problem there. But yeah, I think that's the only thing you can do, practice in a time-bound fashion. Another thing a lot of people find useful is to go through the paper once and look at the easy questions and solve those first. Maybe you can do that because if you have like, say, 10 easy questions which you can solve in 10 minutes, then the math becomes 20 questions in 110 minutes, and you're going to be far more comfortable with that situation. So you can do that as well. For PEB, I'll also suggest something similar. That's what I used to do. You have to solve 4 questions out of 9, I think. So first, look at what the easiest question is out of the 9 and solve that question. Because in PEB, I think there's a serious confidence issue which people face. So if your first question is a tough one and you get stuck somewhere, you might feel like you're in serious trouble. So I'll say choose the easiest question. It's not that hard usually to see what the easiest question is. So select the easiest question, solve that, and then maybe choose what other questions you're going to solve. So there again, you have 120 minutes for 4 questions. Usually one question can be done in 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes or less than that. Like last year's first maths question could be done in 15 minutes, 20 minutes and so on. So again, the equation becomes more comfortable after that. But in PEB, picking your questions is very important. So I think it's okay if you take 5 to 7 minutes just to choose your questions. Maybe you solve a bit of it roughly and so on to see what is easy. Because the biggest problem in PEB is if you choose the wrong question. Because if you've chosen the wrong question, then that's going to be a serious problem for you. But also importantly in PEB, if you do get into a wrong question, I actually ended up doing that. I think there were 6 parts to that question, and I was on the 3rd part when I realized that I can't solve this question. So it's okay to cancel it out and pick a new one. Don't get stuck in any question, and do it in increasing order of difficulty. Do the easiest, second easiest, and so on. And always be calm, because remember, you don't need to solve 4 out of 4 questions in PEB. So yeah, do the easier one first, pick your questions carefully, and be ruthless in the sense that if you see a question I've picked is wrong, cancel it out and pick a new one.
Right. And I think maths was comparatively easier last time.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the problems were
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So, Ishaan, one last thing that I have for you. So, how would you define the culture at ISI? What is that one motivating factor that students should be having to go to ISI over DSC? I mean, I understand you wanted to go for PhD, but how is the culture different here?
So, I mean, I wouldn't like to just compare ISI and DSC. I think DSC is also great fun. ISI is also great fun. But, as a motivator, other than the fact that your job or your PhD is much more likely to be great if you go to ISI, I think once this is done, once you're done with the entrance exam, you can really spend a couple of years in a fairly relaxed way, I think, at ISI. Because the academic workload and all, frankly, aren't that significant, wherein you're going to be stressed for a long time. You get paid to study here, so that's more of a motivation. And the campus life in general is very, very relaxed. It's very, very chill. We all have a lot of fun here, and I think almost nobody there wants to go home ever, because it's so much fun on campus. So yeah, I mean, once you crack this exam and come here, it's great fun, and you can just relax and chill out for a couple of years and end up with a pretty good job or a pretty good PhD placement, irrespective. So I think it's definitely worth spending the next 1.5 months cracking the whip and studying as hard as possible to come here.
Got it. Sure. Thank you so much, Ishaan, for your time. And I hope, you do very, very well at ISI, and all the best for your future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ishaan. Bye.